I was the maid. He was the head of the Bratva Mafia, and his bedroom door was cracked open. That night, Damon Volkov came home soaked in blood and shut himself in. No one was supposed to go up, but I heard the sound through the walls, and the name he breathed was mine. When I pushed the door open, I saw what no maid was ever meant to see. The most dangerous man in Chicago, stripped bare, undone, whispering my name like it was the only word keeping him from falling apart. I should have turned around. I should have run. I should have pretended none of it happened. Instead, I turned the key from the inside, and when Damon raised his eyes to mine, I understood, too late, that I hadn't walked into his room to help him. I had walked in to never walk out again. Chapter 1. The coffee I almost spilled. The alarm rang a second time, and the pale morning light was already cutting through the slim window of my room. I'd been awake for a while, eyes shut, breathing on purpose, slow and measured, the way I did twice a month on Monday mornings before dragging myself into another day inside the Volkov mansion. It was a small ritual, a way of pretending I still had a say in something, even if it was just choosing the exact second I'd plant my feet on the freezing floor. 5:30. The house was silent, or as silent as a place like that ever got. The guards at the gates and along the corridors were awake, of course. According to Sloane, they never closed their eyes. She liked saying that when she was in the mood to make my skin crawl. I dressed fast, the same black and white uniform I'd put on more times than I could remember. Hair pulled back tight, skirt smoothed flat with my palm, and out through the back corridor of the servants' wing, the route I'd taken every single day for the past 2 years. The kitchen waited just beyond the service door, and at that hour, it was the one corner of the mansion where you could exhale without feeling like you owed someone for the air. Sloane was already at the stove, flour-dusted apron, dark hair twisted into a messy pile on top of her head, one hand stirring warm milk while the coffee maker gurgled beside her. 4 years as head cook had earned her a quiet kind of authority over the rest of us. Nothing official, but understood. She was also the only person in that house who'd figured out how to make me laugh on a regular basis. "Good morning, princess," she said, eyes on the pot. "I'm not a princess, Sloane. You're up before dawn. You make your bed before you even get dressed. You press your uniform the night before. If that's not a princess, it's a nun. Your choice." I bit back a smile and reached for the silver tray already laid out on the counter. White porcelain cup, saucer, small pot, sugar bowl, spoon. Everything arranged in the exact same order, the exact same spots, always. "Did the Pakun call down?" I asked. "About 20 minutes ago. He's been locked in his office since 5. I watched the coffee drip into the pot, dark as ink, thick and bitter. The smell rose through the kitchen and settled in my chest the way it did every morning. That was how my day officially began. Not by the clock, not by the light, but by the scent of his coffee. Black, no sugar, strong enough to strip paint. "He's up before God," Sloane muttered, filling the pot to the mark, and twice as moody. "Sloane, I'm only telling the truth, Alina. If it were blasphemy, lightning would have found me years ago." I lifted the tray with both hands and walked toward the main hall. The thick Persian rug swallowed my footsteps, and the tall walls, dark paper, carved molding, seemed to absorb whatever was left. The Pakun's men stood at their positions like fixtures, one by the grandfather clock, one guarding the west wing entrance, 2 more at the top of the grand staircase. None of them so much as glanced my way. That was the rule at the Volkov mansion. Either you learned to be invisible, or someone taught you. The lesson wasn't gentle. I'd picked it up on my own. In 2 years, not a single man in the house had given me a second look. I was fine with that. The estate spread across a wooded lot in Lake Forest, about 40 minutes north of Chicago, tucked behind iron gates and rows of old trees. The servants' wing, my wing, sat on the ground floor behind the kitchen, far from everything important, close to everything no one wanted to notice. I chose the main staircase over the service one. The service stairs were too narrow, and I already knew I'd lose the tray halfway up. The marble steps opened onto a wide corridor, lined with bronze sconces that burned around the clock. At the far end, Damon Volkov's office door stood shut. As always, I stopped outside it, drew a breath, ran through the script I'd been rehearsing since the moment I got out of bed. "Good morning, sir. Your coffee." That was all. A handful of words. Nothing that should require more than a calm voice and downcast eyes. I delivered this line hundreds of times. It wasn't supposed to be difficult. It wasn't supposed to make my palms damp against the handles of the tray. It wasn't supposed to tie a knot in my gut at 5:30. that only came loose once I made it out of that room with everything still upright. I knocked twice. His voice came through the door, low, sharp, no wasted breath. "Come in." I worked the handle with my elbow and nudged the door with my hip. The room unfolded the way it always did. Bookshelves floor to ceiling, heavy desk at the center, a rug that probably cost more than everything I'd ever owned. He sat behind the desk in a dark gray vest, no jacket, scanning a document. He didn't raise his head. "Good morning," I said. "Your coffee." No response. That was standard. I moved toward the desk in a straight line. On the fourth step, my heel snagged the edge of the rug. My balance shifted forward before I could catch it, and the tray tipped dangerously in my left hand. The coffee was about to go everywhere. His vest, his papers, the desk, all of it. I shut my eyes, and in that instant, his hand closed around my wrist. The tray leveled out. His grip circled my wrist over the sleeve, steady enough to stop the fall, light enough to leave no mark. He hadn't stood up. He'd simply extended his arm across the desk, almost casually, as if he'd seen it coming long before it happened. His gaze never left the document. "Careful," he said. I couldn't speak. His hand was warm, far too warm for a man who carried himself like he was carved from something cold. The heat seeped through the fabric of my sleeve and found a place inside me that I spent every waking hour pretending wasn't there. 3 seconds. He held on for 3 seconds after the tray was steady. On the fourth, he released me. Not once did his eyes move from the page. "Leave it there," he said. I obeyed like a machine. 3 steps forward, tray down on the corner of the desk. 3 steps back. My fingers were shaking when I clasped them together over my apron to keep them still. I dipped into a quick curtsy he didn't notice and turned for the door. That was when he looked up. I didn't see it. I felt it. The back of my neck registered it the way skin registers a flame held too close. That heavy, precise pressure settling between my shoulder blades, following me even after I crossed the threshold. I descended the main staircase without looking back. The ground floor corridor was empty. The kitchen appeared at the end of it like a refuge. Sloane raised her eyes the second I walked in. "You look like you just ran into a wall." I nearly spilled the coffee. She stopped stirring. Nearly. He caught it. Sloane was quiet for longer than felt natural. Then she turned back to the stove, let out a soft whistle, and resumed stirring with the focus of someone pretending to be busy. "Princess, if he saved the coffee, it's because he didn't want it on the floor. If he grabbed your wrist, that's a different thing entirely." "Sloane. Facts." Again, I said nothing. I slipped out the back door into the garden and spent the next 2 hours trying to understand why the spot where his fingers had been still felt like it was on fire. The morning unfolded the way mornings always did. Fresh sheets in 3 guest rooms, the music room tidied, the library shelves dusted. Damon never left his office. I knew because the door stayed closed, and the guards in the corridor hadn't shifted an inch. He never ate lunch with anyone. Not once. Around 2 o'clock, Mrs. Petrova sent me to carry a stack of clean towels from the service wing to the linen closet in the west wing. The fastest route cut through the service corridor, a cramped, low-ceilinged passage between the east and west wings on the 2nd floor, barely lit, designed so the staff could move through the house unseen. It was so narrow that 2 people couldn't walk past each other without pressing against the wall. I moved quickly, the towels clutched to my chest. The corridor bent into an L near its center, right where a built-in cabinet met a wall sconce that had never worked properly. That was where I found him, Damon, coming from the other end. There was no reason for him to be in that corridor. No one in the family ever used it, but there he was, and there I was, and there was no way to pass without our bodies touching. I froze. He froze. The sconce sputtered twice and went dark, leaving nothing but the thin wash of daylight from a window at the far end. I raised the stack of towels higher, as though linen could protect me from whatever this was. He didn't step aside. He didn't look at me, not directly. His face was level with mine, but his gaze drifted past my shoulder to some fixed point on the wall behind me, as if meeting my eyes was something he couldn't permit himself. His breath landed softly on my hair. It lingered there, warm, unhurried, long enough for me to know he wasn't going to act, and long enough for me to know he wanted to. Neither of us spoke. Then he turned and walked away. No word, no gesture, no backward glance. His stride was even and controlled, and he rounded the curve of the corridor as if the last 30 seconds hadn't happened at all. I stayed rooted to the spot, gripping the towels, my pulse hammering in my ears louder than it had any right to. The hallway felt suddenly freezing. Or maybe I was the one who'd gone cold. It was hard to tell. By the time I reached the linen closet, my hands were unsteady again. The towels went in crooked. Mrs. Petrova would notice later and send me back to redo it. I couldn't bring myself to care. The rest of the day passed without incident. Dinner with Sloane in the kitchen, uniform washed in the service laundry, a fast shower, and the door to my room locked before 10. My window overlooked the side of the garage, and I always kept the curtain halfway open. The Lake Forest sky, even on a plain Monday night, was beautiful enough to forgive the brick wall underneath it. I lay down with wet hair, closed my eyes, ordered myself not to think, not about the warmth of his hand around my wrist, not about the way his gaze had dropped to my mouth in the corridor, not about the silence that said more than any word could have. Sleep was close. I was almost there when the sound broke through. A heavy engine, tires chewing gravel on the driveway, one vehicle, then a second, maybe a third, tearing through the service gate far too fast for any routine arrival. Brakes shrieked, doors cracked open and slammed, and then came a sound I'd grown to recognize over 2 years in this house. Hurried, clumsy footsteps, men hauling something heavy between them. I sat up. The clock read 11:47, boots on the garage stairs, muffled voices. Someone barked an order in Russian. Someone answered. And then, rising above everything else, Kirill Sokolov's voice, sharp, tight, in English, carrying a single word that traveled through the ventilation duct and into my room. Doctor. I didn't move. I'm not sure I breathed. The entire house seemed to go still around me, and I understood, in that moment, that someone upstairs had come home wounded. Chapter 2. The Rule. He tried to keep the intercom buzzed at 4 minutes past 2 in the morning. I wasn't asleep. I'd been flat on my back for the past 2 hours, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling while my ear stayed pressed to the ventilation duct in the corner of the room. The same duct that had delivered Kirill's voice earlier, that single word sinking through me like ice water. Since then, I'd been listening to the house breathe all wrong. Doors thudding shut, footsteps uneven and heavy, a voice speaking Russian too quietly to decipher and too urgent to ignore. 2 hours of that. 2 hours of waiting for something I couldn't name. My hand was already on the receiver when it rang. Alina. Kirill's voice came through flat, no preamble. Bring the big kit upstairs. Now. He hung up before I could respond. The big kit lived in a locked cabinet at the far end of the servants' corridor. Only 3 people in the house had the key. It was the Pecan's personal first aid supply. Larger, better stocked, more serious than anything you'd find in a drugstore. I'd only been asked to bring it up once before, the night Kirill showed up with a gash across his face from an altercation no one ever bothered to explain. If they were calling for it again, whatever had happened tonight was worse. I threw a robe over my nightgown, stepped into my slippers, and retrieved the key from its hiding place behind the kitchen clock, the spot Mrs. Petrova thought only she knew about. My hands were calm. I couldn't explain it. Something inside me had already decided that trembling was a luxury the night wouldn't allow. I climbed the main staircase. The West Wing corridor was dimly lit, only 2 sconces glowing, and a guard stood outside the Pakhan's office door. He glanced at me, then at the kit, then back at me, and turned away as though I were part of the wallpaper. Kirill met me at the door before I could knock. He won't go to a hospital, he said, voice barely above a whisper. I've already pushed. What happened? Knife wound. Right flank. Missed the organs. Hit deep muscle. But it's bad. Kirill had been at Damon's side since they were boys. If he was handing this kit to me instead of waiting for the family doctor, it meant the doctor was still en route, and that no one else in the house, at this hour, could tend to a wound without risking a violent reaction in return. Where is he? Bathroom. Go. I went. The office was nearly dark. A single desk lamp cast a low glow, and the door to the attached bathroom stood cracked open in the far corner. I crossed the Persian rug with the kit held tight against me, past the same desk where I'd balanced a coffee tray that morning, and stopped at the threshold. Damon sat on the rim of the marble bathtub. No shoes, no shirt. His gray trousers were soaked with blood along the right side, the belt still fastened at his hip. A white towel lay crumpled on the floor, soaked red. The wound on his flank, just above his waistline, was an open gash about 3 inches long, deep enough to steal the air from my lungs. He raised his head. His face was clean, his hair pushed back wet, and his pale gray eyes held the same unshakable composure as always, as if a knife to his side ranked somewhere below lukewarm coffee on his list of annoyances. Shut the door, he said. I did. I knelt on the bath mat, unlatched the kit, and laid out what I needed along the edge of the tub. Mrs. Petrova had trained me to suture skin during my first year in the house. At the Volkov mansion, A maid with that skill was worth twice her weight. His hands rested flat on his knees. His breathing was slow, deliberate. This close, I could see the wolf tattoo inked in black beneath his left collarbone, the mark of the Volkov Bratva, given only to those who'd pledged in blood. There were other scars, too. An old one on his shoulder, poorly healed. A thin, pale line tracing his ribs on the right side, visible only because he leaned forward as I approached with the saline. "This will burn," I said. "I know." I poured the solution over the wound. He didn't flinch. The only tell was his right hand, the fingers curling slowly closed, then opening again, like a man measuring how much control he had left. I cleaned the edges with gauze, drew up the local anesthetic, injected it on both sides of the gash, and waited for it to take hold. He was watching me. I could feel his gaze move from the crown of my head to my face, then to my hands. I didn't look up, not once. "Who did this to you?" The question left my mouth before I had time to decide it wasn't my place to ask. Someone who expected to see the morning. "Did he?" A pause. "No." I swallowed hard and kept working. The needle entered the skin the way Mrs. Petrova had drilled into me. Close to the edge, shallow enough. My hand locked steady through every pass. 1 stitch, 2, 3. I counted them in silence. Damon said nothing. On the 5th stitch, he spoke. "You're very good at this, Alina." The first time in 2 years he'd said my name out loud. My hand stopped. Not for long, a heartbeat maybe, but long enough for both of us to notice. I resumed. "Thank you," I said. That wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. Even so, he went quiet until I finished. I snipped the thread, spread ointment over the wound, pressed the gauze down, and sealed it with a wide strip of tape, exactly the way I'd been taught. When I looked up, he was still in the same position, hands on his knees, eyes on me. I began packing the supplies back into the kit. My hands were still steady, and then his hand came, unhurried, without warning. His arm extended, and his fingers closed around my wrist. The same one, the right one, the same wrist he'd caught that morning to keep the tray from falling. But this time, his eyes weren't fixed on paperwork. They were fixed on mine. I raised my head because there was nothing else I could do. The distance between us had collapsed to almost nothing. I was kneeling on the mat. He was perched on the rim of the tub, and our faces were nearly level. His bare chest was inches away. I could see the pulse ticking in his throat, the damp strand of hair clinging to his forehead, the rough scar on his shoulder in sharp detail. His gaze dropped to my mouth. I forgot how to breathe. His hand released my wrist and rose. His thumb found the edge of my jaw and settled there, perfectly still. No man had touched my face like that in 23 years of living. In that single moment I understood what it actually meant to shiver, a word I'd only ever encountered in novels. His mouth moved closer, an inch, half an inch. I felt his breath graze my upper lip. I could smell him, salt, copper, something warm underneath, and I felt the heat radiating off his chest in slow waves, and I closed my eyes because it was the only instinct my body still remembered. He stopped. He didn't pull back. He simply stopped. His hand remained on my face. His breath still hovered over my mouth, but he stayed frozen there, motionless, until I opened my eyes and found the gray of his staring back. "You don't understand," he said. His voice was stripped bare, rougher than usual, the fraying thread of a man who'd lost blood hours ago and was still trying to remember how discipline worked. "Understand what? How dangerous it is to be this close to me." He withdrew his hand from my face. His thumb grazed my cheek as it left. Barely a touch. That was the part that hurt the most. Not the distance he was putting between us, but the tenderness in the way he did it. He stood from the edge of the tub with a grimace he made no effort to conceal, took the towel from the rack, pressed it against his side, and turned his back. "You can go, Alina." I stayed on my knees a moment longer, fingers clenched around the rim of the kit, until I felt the metal bite into my palms. Then I rose, picked up the kit, walked out. Kirill was leaning against the desk. He looked at me, then at the bathroom door, then at me again. He said nothing. I left the office with the kit clutched to my chest, went down the staircase, through the empty corridor, and into the kitchen before my legs buckled. Sloane was awake. Of course she was. It was just past 3 a.m, and she sat at the table with a mug of tea between her hands, her hair pinned up in its usual careless way, her eyes already waiting for me at the door. "Sit," she said. "I'm not going to ask." I sat, set the kit on the table. My hands only began to shake after my body hit the chair. Sloane slid her mug across the table without a word, pulled her chair closer to mine, and stayed there in silence until I managed to bring the cup to my lips. She didn't ask a single question. She kept her word, but she watched me over the rim of her mug. with the look she always wore when she knew I was lying to myself. The next 2 days crawled by. I caught glimpses of Damon 3 times in the hallway, always at a distance, never turning his head in my direction. I watched his office door swing shut whenever I approached with the tray. I watched a different maid, sent by Mrs. Petrova without explanation, carry the coffee pot upstairs in my place. I'd crossed a line, and he'd stepped back. It was as simple as that. On the afternoon of the second day, Mrs. Petrova asked me to receive a delivery at the front portico. A massive arrangement was arriving. White lilies mixed with dark roses, wrapped in black paper and tied with a satin ribbon. Fresh flowers came to the mansion every week. It was routine, nothing more. I signed the receipt, sent the delivery man on his way, and was turning back toward the door when I heard the engine, a black sedan, sleek and low, rolled to a stop on the gravel a few feet from the portico steps. The rear door swung open, and a woman emerged. Long red coat falling to mid-calf, belted tight at the waist. Black stilettos, a leather bag hanging from her right hand. Dark hair swept back, makeup immaculate, lips painted the exact shade of the coat. She looked to be in her 30s, with the posture of someone who had never once waited for an invitation, and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes when she spotted me standing on the portico with the bouquet. "Sweetheart," she said, her accent stretching the vowels just slightly. "Aren't you going to help me with this bag?" I didn't move. She paused 2 steps below the top, the cool smile still in place, and waited. "May I ask who you are, ma'am?" "Zoya Ivanov, guest of the family." She climbed the remaining steps without waiting for a response, brushed past me, pushed open the mansion's front door, as if the house belonged to her, and deposited the leather bag into my hands, without so much as a glance. "Let the Pakan know I've arrived," and she disappeared inside. I stood alone on the portico, the bouquet in my left hand and a stranger's bag in my right, while the cold Lake Forest wind curled up beneath my skirt, and the perfume she'd left hanging in the air settled into my chest like a threat. The woman in the red coat had just walked into the house, and I had no idea yet what that was going to cost me. Chapter 3. The Woman in the Red Coat. The breakfast room sat on the ground floor of the west wing, wedged between the main hall and the formal dining room. By the mansion's standards, it was modest, a round table that seated 6 tall windows overlooking the back garden, and a mahogany sideboard where the guests' breakfast appeared on silver trays every morning at 7:30. I'd never been fond of the room. Too much light poured in, and the guests had a habit of standing around watching the staff move as though we were furniture that happened to breathe. That Friday, the light felt worse than usual. I walked in at 7:40 with a fresh pot of coffee and a pitcher of juice, and Zoya Ivanov was already seated. Short black dress, legs crossed, a book lying open on the table that she clearly wasn't reading. Her hair fell over one bare shoulder, and her lipstick was the same sharp red as the day before, as though she kept identical backups stashed somewhere for emergencies. Olga and Natasha were both in the room, hovering near the sideboard, pretending to rearrange dishes that didn't need rearranging. Kirill leaned in the doorframe with his arms folded, a cup of black coffee in one hand. He wasn't there by coincidence. Kirill was never anywhere by coincidence. "Good morning," I said, setting my tray on the sideboard. Zoya glanced up from her book. "Good morning, sweetheart. Bring that coffee here, would you?" I picked up the pot, crossed the room, and poured. My hand didn't waver. I was grateful for that. While I poured, her eyes drifted down to my fingers. She took the cup in both hands, wrapping them around the porcelain a beat longer than necessary, and then lifted her gaze to mine with that thin smile that never quite made it past her mouth. "My dear," she said, louder than required, pitched for the room. "You have such young hands for so many calluses. Hands age before the face when the work is rough. In the right kind of woman, naturally. The ones the Volkovs take seriously never had to scrub their own plates." I said nothing. Kirill, in the doorframe, didn't stir. Olga turned her face toward the window. Zoya delivered it in English, lightly, the way someone might remark on the weather. The heat crept up my neck. Not because of the words, because of the audience. "Will there be anything else, ma'am?" "No, sweetheart. Thank you." I stepped back, collected the tray, and moved toward the door. Kirill didn't shift out of my way immediately. He studied me with one brow slightly raised, took a slow sip of his coffee, and said under his breath, in English, "Calluses on a worker's hands are decorations on a castle wall. The wall falls first." He followed me out. In 2 years, I'd never heard Kirill string together more than 5 words at once. That was practically an oration. Back in the kitchen, Sloane had her fists buried in bread dough, elbows dusted white, hair piled on top of her head. She took one look at my face and scowled before I'd said a word. What did she do? Made a remark about my calluses. In front of Olga, Natasha, and Kirill. I'm spitting in her coffee. Sloan. I'm organizing shifts, Alina. A proper rotation. I nearly laughed. I grabbed a dish towel, dropped onto the stool at the island, and studied my hands. There was a small callus on the knuckle of my right thumb, and an old scar along the side of my index finger from a cut in my 3rd month at the house. Mrs. Petrova had slipped me an expensive salve and told me never to mention where it came from. Workers' hands. Yes, the hands of a girl from the south side of Chicago, who started cleaning apartments at 17 to keep Callum in school, who lost her mother at 18 and juggled 2 jobs to survive, who walked through these gates at 21 with a crumpled reference letter in her bag and the certainty that she was doing the only thing she could still do for the family she had left. The name Volkov traveled in whispers through the pool halls of the neighborhood. I knew what those gates meant the first time I stepped beneath them. Someone had warned me, 2 days before the interview, that a maid who enters the Volkov mansion never leaves the same way she came in. I walked in anyway. Every month I sent money to Callum. He was 17 now, and he still needed me. The only thing that keeps a woman like me on her feet is knowing who she's standing for. The calluses could stay. I won't actually spit in her coffee, Princess, Sloan said, punching the dough back into shape, but I am going to brew it weak, just to see if she notices. Then I'll resign in the middle of the drawing room, right in front of the pakan, and say, I'm terribly sorry, sir. I only made it the way your guest requested. It's going to be magnificent. I laughed. Out loud this time. At noon, the dining room table was set for 5. Consigliere Grigory Rostov sat to the right of the head, Damon's chair. Kirill stood behind it. Zoya had claimed the seat to Damon's left, as though it had been reserved for her by birthright. 2 men I didn't recognize occupied the far end, speaking in Russian. Olga and I were serving. Everything proceeded smoothly, or at least quietly, until Zoya raised her wine glass, turned her eyes on me, and said in English, loud enough to cut through both Russian conversations at once, Damon, is this the girl you hired to bring the coffee? She has such a curious way of moving. Very graceful, very devoted. It's a pity about the hands. Silence. I was serving the consigliere's plate. My hand held steady, but the air in the room went dead. Kirill's gaze traveled in a single beat from the corner of Zoya's mouth to Damon's face. Damon set down his silverware, not quickly, with a slow, measured precision that made the metal ring against the porcelain like a small bell. He turned his head toward Zoya. Zoya. His voice was low, controlled, and cold enough to frost the glass in her hand. Yes, Damon, this woman has been in my employ for 2 years, not yours. You are a guest in this house as a courtesy, not by right. The next time I hear a remark from you, of any kind, about any member of my staff, you will be taking your breakfasts elsewhere. Am I clear? Zoya's mouth opened, closed, opened again. I asked if I was clear. Clear. Damon, you know Good. He picked up his knife and fork and resumed cutting his meat as though the exchange had never occurred. Grigory, across the table, kept his eyes on his plate, but I caught the faintest twitch at the corner of his mouth, something that wasn't quite a smile, but was the closest thing to approval that old man ever allowed himself. Beside me, Olga took her first real breath in a minute. I finished serving. My hand was steady. My gaze stayed on the floor, and my heart, in a place I hadn't known existed, was beating slow and whole for the first time in 3 days. As I left the dining room with the empty tray, Damon raised his eyes from his plate. He looked at me. I didn't look back, but I felt it, the full weight of it settling between my shoulder blades. Maybe I wasn't as invisible as I'd trained myself to be. I spent the afternoon in the music room. It was my favorite room to clean in the entire house. A black grand piano at its center, a sheet music stand along the wall, a deep blue Persian rug underfoot, and a velvet curtain I drew open once a month. Nobody ever played the piano. I would lift the lid, wipe the keys, close it again, always when no one was watching. Around 7 that evening, I was in the kitchen eating bread and cheese when the engines growled to life in the garage. 2 cars, then 3. Kirill descended the main staircase at a clipped pace, 3 men in black falling in behind him. Damon followed, jacket buttoned, collar turned up, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. I watched from the service wing window. The headlights swept across the gravel and vanished beyond the gate. Where are they going? I asked Sloan, my eyes still on the darkness outside. Somewhere neither of us wants to know about, she said. I tried to sleep. Lights off at 11, eyes closed, body still, but every part of me was listening. It was close to 3 in the morning when the cars returned. The tires ground against the gravel differently this time. Heavier, slower. One door slammed ahead of the rest. Hurried footsteps at the service entrance. I recognized the voices. Kirill barking at 2 men to get something upstairs, fast. I got out of bed. Robe over my nightgown, slippers on, down the service stairs without flipping a single switch. The kitchen was dark and empty. Sloane was asleep in her small room behind the pantry. I cut through the side hallway, pulse hammering in my ears, and reached the main hall just as they came through. Damon was at the front. He was walking under his own power, but unevenly, listing to one side. His white shirt was stained at the right shoulder, dark dried blood near the collar, brighter red lower down where it was still wet. His eyes were open, but they weren't in this hallway. One hand gripped his own shoulder. The other hung limp at his side, fingers dark with blood to the nail. Kirill walked half a step behind, one hand bracing the Pakin's elbow. 2 men in black followed, one of them limping. I was pressed flat against the wall at the edge of the hall. Damon passed within 6 feet of me. He turned his head, found me. His gray eyes locked onto mine for a full second, a second in which I saw everything he was holding back, and he saw that I could see it. He didn't stop. He kept walking, climbed the staircase with Kirill at his side, turned into the West Wing corridor, and I heard his bedroom door slam shut. I stood in the hall, not breathing. Kirill came back down 2 minutes later. He walked past me without a glance, pulled the radio from his pocket, and spoke something brief in Russian. Then he paused at the foot of the stairs, half turned, and addressed me in English without quite meeting my eyes. "Stay in the kitchen. The doctor's coming. He doesn't want anyone going up." Kirill left through the service door. I heard his car pull away and disappear past the gate. The house fell silent. I returned to the kitchen. Sloane had woken at the commotion. She sat at the table with her hair pinned up and a glass of water in front of her. She looked at me, looked toward the hall, looked back at me. Hurt? Shoulder. Bad? I don't know. She poured me a glass of water without asking whether I wanted one. I sat beside her. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Eventually, Sloane told me to go lie down. I did. I didn't sleep. I was in my room on the ground floor, nearly 5 in the morning, when I heard it. Not a footstep. Not a door. A muffled sound filtering down through the ventilation duct that linked the servants' floor to the central system. The same duct that had carried the word doctor to me the last time he'd come home bleeding. A low sound, caught in the throat. Then another. Short. Bitten off. I sat up. I knew what the wound looked like. I'd seen the blood soaking his shirt, and he'd gone upstairs alone, refusing to let anyone in. The doctor still hadn't arrived. I would have heard the car. If he was in trouble up there by himself, I was going to hear it through those walls. And I was hearing it. I stood, pulled on the robe, grabbed the key to the first aid cabinet, set a tray with a pitcher of water, 2 towels, a roll of gauze, and a bottle of antiseptic, and I went upstairs. Chapter 4. The door I shouldn't have opened. I climbed the service stairs in the dark. 2 years of counting every step in that house had mapped it into my muscles. Which boards groaned, where the runner buckled, where the landing sconce threw its shadow across the corridor. I moved with the tray pressed to my chest, the thin satin robe knotted at my waist, the small box of gauze wedged into the corner of the tray so it wouldn't slide. The West Wing corridor was dim. The guard who usually stood at the entrance was gone, pulled from his post most likely, the moment Damon went upstairs. Better for me, worse for him. My slippers were silent on the runner. I covered the length of the hallway and stopped outside his bedroom door. It was ajar, a sliver of space, 2 fingers wide, just enough for the bedside lamp to leak a thin stripe of gold onto the hallway floor. That wasn't right. Nothing in the Volkov mansion existed halfway. Doors were open, or they were shut. There was no in-between, because in-between was a gap, and gaps were what got men like him killed. I thought of the doctor, whose car I'd spent the entire night straining to hear on the gravel, and never did. Someone else had come up. Someone had redressed the wound and left without pulling the door fully closed. Kirill, probably, under orders to be quick and quiet. The old latch needed a firm push to catch, and whoever left last hadn't bothered to check. I steadied my breath, leaned my ear toward the gap, and I heard a low sound, pressed between teeth, rough. It wasn't what pain sounded like. Mrs. Petrova had taught me that difference. It was something else entirely, something I had no word for, but my body recognized it before my mind caught up. I should have turned around, gone back to the kitchen and pretended I'd never set foot on that staircase. Instead, I pressed the door with my shoulder, half an inch, just far enough to see inside, and I saw he was on the bed, The nightstand lamp cast a warm circle over his upper body, bare from the waist up. The gray trousers unfastened, pushed low on his hips, the belt hanging loose. The gauze on his shoulder, the fresh wound, not the one on his flank, was in place but had shifted. His left hand rested on his abdomen, his right hand, lower. His eyes were closed. His head was tipped back into the padded headboard. His breathing came in jagged pulls, caught somewhere between the ache in his shoulder and the thing his body was chasing to outrun the ache. His face, the face I'd watched remain perfectly composed over 2 years of breakfasts and hallway crossings, was stripped bare. Jaw locked, lips parted, the weight of the entire night carved into the crease between his brows. He hadn't seen me, and before I could pull back, he said it, barely above a breath, raw in his throat, as though the word had escaped without permission. Alina. The tray slipped from my hands. The pitcher hit the runner, didn't shatter, rolled. The towels landed softly. The box of gauze bounced off the hardwood in the narrow gap between the runner and the wall, a short, dry crack that cut through the silence of the room like a gunshot. He opened his eyes. For 1 second, neither of us breathed. He was still in the same position, his hand still where it had been, his entire body frozen in the middle of what it had been doing. The pale gray eyes found me, the open door, the scattered tray, the woman in a robe standing in the threshold with her hand pressed over her mouth. I tried to speak. Nothing came out the first time. I didn't see anything, I managed. A thread of sound. He didn't move. You shouldn't lie to me, Alina. Low, without anger, the voice of a man who had just lost his grip on something and was realizing in front of the maid that the grip still hadn't returned. I should have left. Should have run. Should have abandoned the tray where it fell and taken the service stairs 3 at a time and spent the rest of my life pretending that door had never been pushed. Instead, my legs kept me exactly where I was. Is that why? I said, in a voice I barely recognized. You've been avoiding me for 3 days? He shut his eyes for a moment. When they opened again, they were on me, and for the first time in 2 years, there was no mask. Yes, 1 word, nothing else. How long? I asked. 2 years. I closed my eyes, opened them. You knew, I said, every single time. I looked away before you did. My hand fell from my mouth. My legs held, but only just. Then why? He drew a slow breath. He was trying to sit up, and I could see his right shoulder seize with the effort. Because any woman close to me becomes a target, Alina. Because I've already lost people over less than this. Because you're the only untouched thing in this house. And I wasn't going to be the one to destroy that. You don't have the right, I said. I know I don't. To choose for me. To decide I'm too clean to make my own choices. To decide I'm too fragile to know what I want. His voice cracked on the next answer. I heard it. It was the first time. I know, Alina. I don't remember deciding to move. I don't know when my legs took over without consulting me. I only know that suddenly I was inside the room, and the door was closed at my back, and my hand had turned the key in the lock before the thought had fully formed. I crossed the rug, stopped at the foot of the bed. He looked up at me. The gray in his eyes had gone dark. Alina, I came to fix the dressing, I said. Alina, but I didn't come to leave. He closed his eyes for another beat. When he opened them, he extended his hand. The left one, the one that hadn't been occupied, the one that had been resting on his stomach a minute before. He turned the palm upward, waited. Come, he said. I went. My hand found his, and he drew me in with a gentleness I hadn't believed a man that size could hold. The mattress dipped on his side when I sat at the edge. The scent of his body, this close, was warm and metallic. Blood, cologne, the sweat of a long night. The new wound on his shoulder was still seeping faintly beneath the gauze. Lower, on his right flank, the dressing I'd applied days earlier was still intact, the line of my stitches visible under the tape. I recognized my own work on his skin before I recognized anything else. He raised his hand to my face, let it travel slowly through my hair, brushed the strands that had fallen across my eye. Are you sure? He said, without making it a question. I'm sure. Look at me, Alina. I looked. If you want to stop, at any point, you say the word, and I stop. I don't have control over much tonight, but that I do. Okay, tell me you understand. I understand. He kissed me. It wasn't the kiss I'd imagined during the 2 years I'd spent imagining it. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was slow. The kiss of a man who had waited too long to risk getting it wrong. His mouth was warm, sure, and moved with a kind of knowledge that made me feel small and whole at the same time. His hand traveled down my neck, across my shoulder, found the satin knot at my waist. He loosened it without hurry. The robe fell open. He eased it off my shoulders as though peeling away a layer of armor I no longer needed. The white slip underneath was thin, plain, nothing remarkable, just a tired maid's nightgown. He looked at it as though it were silk. "You're shaking," he murmured against my lips. "It's not fear, I know." He lowered me against the pillows with the care of someone setting down something precious, not broken, and he knew it. His mouth found my throat, found the ridge of my collarbone, found a place below my shoulder I hadn't known could feel that way. He didn't speak. I didn't speak. Only the sounds that slipped free before either of us could catch them. The slip came off. The sheet grew warm beneath my back. He shed the trousers and covered me slowly with his own body. Weight, heat, the rough edge of the gauze on his shoulder just visible at the corner of my eye. He didn't press his full weight on me. He held himself on his forearms. "Are you okay?" he said, and I knew it was a question. "I'm okay. I'm going slow. I know." And he did, with a patience that made me understand, for the first time, what Sloane meant when she said the first time leaves a mark on the body deeper than anything. There was a brief pain at the start, unfamiliar, warm, full. I held my breath, and he stopped, waited until I released it, waited until his hand found mine on the sheet, and our fingers wove together, and only then did he move again, with a tenderness that needed no explanation. With a rhythm he let my body set beneath his, and somewhere between his breath on my forehead and his gaze meeting mine, the pain became something else. The unfamiliar became mine. The fullness became a word I didn't yet know how to say. I kept my eyes open. I didn't want to lose his face. "Alina," he whispered, not the tone of a man asking, but of a man discovering. "Damon, mine." It wasn't possession. It was an offering. A man saying for the first time in his life a word he'd kept locked away for years. I released his hand, brought mine to his face, held him. He closed his eyes against my palm, and that was the moment the wave rose through both of us at once, not like an explosion, but like a tide that asks no one's permission, that climbs through the whole body in a single surge, that strips the sound from the room and leaves only the two of us breathing, and his weight, and my hand on his face, and the word he'd spoken hanging in the air like a vow without a witness. He stayed braced above me for a while afterward, forehead pressed to mine, chest rising and falling, his left hand still in mine. Neither of us let go. When he finally shifted to the side, it was slow. He pulled me with him, propped himself on one elbow, watching me, his thumb traced down my face. "Everything's okay," he said. It wasn't a question. "It is. You can cry, if you need to." "I don't need to." He smiled. For the first time in 2 years, I saw Damon Volkov smile. Not much, just one corner of his mouth lifting, but it was a smile, and it was mine. He gathered me against his chest. The injured shoulder stayed elevated. I pressed my face to his sternum, right where the smaller scar sat, and listened to his heartbeat, still uneven, still settling. He pulled the sheet over both of us, turned off the lamp. "Sleep. Are you going to?" "I'm going to try." I closed my eyes. He didn't let go of my hand. I woke before dawn. The room was bathed in the pale blue of first light seeping through the windows. The sheet was warm. His chest rose and fell beneath my cheek in a steady, slow rhythm. His hand, which had fallen asleep tangled with mine, had loosened, fingers relaxed, but still touching. I thought about slipping out of the bed. I thought about taking the service stairs before the house stirred, before he opened his eyes, before he saw my face in daylight and wished he hadn't. I was 23 years old, and I'd learned early that men in the morning aren't the same men they were at dawn. The doubt climbed my chest like nausea. I started to ease away. His hand tightened around mine. Not hard, firm. "No," he said, voice heavy with sleep, eyes still closed. "Stay." He drew me back against his chest, slid his right arm over me, the hurt shoulder still lifted off the mattress, his whole body reshaping itself around mine, as though this were the only way he knew how to rest, and he fell back asleep, as if I had always been there. Chapter 5. Nobody touches what's his. I woke a second time when the sun had fully claimed the room. The side of the bed where Damon had slept was empty. I sat up slowly, drawing the sheet over my chest, and looked around. His bedroom in daylight was less daunting than it had been under lamplight. A shirt lay folded at the foot of the bed. Light blue, silk, far too large for me. He'd left it there deliberately. I slipped it on and buttoned it from the middle up, my bare feet sinking into the rug. His scent lived in the fabric, and that was a new thing to carry with me. I took the main staircase down. I knew a maid leaving her employer's bedroom the morning after was supposed to use the service stairs. But something in me had made its choice the night before, and it wasn't about to apologize for it now. The kitchen smelled of strong coffee and bread, just pulled from the oven. Sloane had her back to me, apron tied over her uniform. She glanced over her shoulder when the door shut, turned back to the stove, then looked again. She set the spoon down, turned all the way around, took me in from the top of my head to my bare toes, opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "You're standing in my kitchen wearing a silk shirt that costs more than my monthly rent," she said, in the tone of someone unearthing a fossil. "A man's shirt, oversized, smelling like cologne I could never afford, and you just came down the main staircase, not the service one. Princess, Alina, look me in the eye. Is this what I think it is?" I opened my mouth to answer. I didn't have to. Damon walked in through the door that connected to the ground floor hallway. Dark trousers, white shirt open at the collar, fresh gauze visible beneath the fabric on his right shoulder. He'd done the dressing himself, or Kirill had, or the doctor had finally arrived at dawn. I didn't know yet. I'd find out later. He looked at me, looked at the shirt I was wearing, looked at Sloane. He crossed to the coffee maker without hurrying, pulled a mug from the cabinet with the ease of a man who'd done it in his own kitchen 10,000 times, and poured himself a cup, black. Then he took a second mug, glanced at me, raised one eyebrow. "Coffee?" And I nodded. He poured, handed it to me. His fingers grazed mine. "Good morning," he said quietly. "Good morning." He took the first sip without looking away from me. Then he left the kitchen the same way he'd entered. The door swung shut. Sloane was still standing there with the spoon in her hand. She started, and stopped. "I need to sit down." She dropped onto the stool at the island, stayed silent for about 10 seconds, then looked at me. "The coffee came out too strong today," she said. "That's my only official remark." "Sloane." "No, Princess. I have the single most critical event in this kitchen happening right now. Milk is going into the bread. I cannot be distracted. Go on. Drink your coffee. We'll talk later. Much later. When I've got liquor in my hand and steadier knees." I laughed. It came out short, new, rising from a place in my chest still raw from the night before. Sloane shook her head, gave my shoulder a light push as I passed, and turned back to the stove muttering something in Spanish I couldn't fully catch, though I was fairly certain it was profanity. The music room occupied the far end of the east wing on the ground floor. A square space, the black grand piano at its center, a sheet music stand against the west wall, a tall window facing the side garden, and a dark blue rug that swallowed every footstep. After lunch, I grabbed the dust cloth and went in. It was technically Olga's shift, but I'd swapped with her. I needed a quiet, empty room where nobody would come looking for me. I had my back to the door, wiping down the closed lid of the piano. When the door opened behind me, I didn't hear footsteps. Only the scent arrived first. Heavy, sweet, too much lemon layered over deep amber. Zoya's perfume. I didn't turn around. "Have you ever actually used this room?" Her voice came from the doorway, low and deliberate. "Or do you just clean it?" I kept wiping. "I just clean it." "What a shame. It's a lovely room." She stepped inside. I heard the click of her heel on hardwood before it landed on the rug and went silent. She'd stopped near the piano, on the opposite side from me. "Did you sleep well, sweetheart?" That wasn't a question. It was a probe. She'd seen something that morning. A maid glancing at me a certain way. The bedroom door still shut at 8. The shirt on top of the laundry. Who knew? Zoya Ivanov had an instinct for these things, and I wasn't going to insult either of us by pretending she didn't. I turned to face her for the first time. She stood on the other side of the piano, one hand resting on the closed lid. Tailored black trousers, white blouse, hair down, the red lipstick in place. The cold smile, too. "I slept well, ma'am. Thank you. And him? Did he sleep well?" I didn't rush my answer. I folded the dust cloth into thirds, careful with my fingers, and set it on the shelf beside the vase. "You're a guest here, ma'am. If you have questions about the Pakan's rest, I'd suggest asking him directly." Her smile stiffened. She hadn't expected that. "Watch your tone, sweetheart. My tone is exactly where it should be, ma'am. I've known Damon longer than you've been alive. I know precisely the kind of woman he reaches for when the night gets long, and I know precisely the kind of woman he forgets when the sun comes up." I held her gaze, straight on, without blinking. "How long will you be staying, ma'am? I'm only asking so I know whether to set the dinner table for 4 or 5 over the coming days." She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. That was when I caught, at the edge of my vision, the shadow standing in the doorway, Damon, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. I had no idea how long he'd been there, and nothing in his expression told me which part of the conversation he'd walked in on. His eyes were on me. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Zoya turned, saw him, and squared her shoulders in a small, tight motion. The cold smile tried to reassemble itself and failed. She moved past the piano, crossed the room with her perfume trailing ahead of her, and walked out without sparing me another glance. She passed within inches of Damon at the door. He never took his eyes off me. When she had vanished down the hallway, he came in, closed the door behind him. 3 strides, and he was beside me. He lifted his hand and tucked a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "You didn't have to deal with her on your own," he said. "I did. Why?" "Because if I couldn't handle her by myself, I'd spend the rest of my life needing you to do it for me." He didn't respond. He looked at my mouth for one long moment. Then his hand dropped, found mine, and his fingers threaded through mine. He raised my hand to his lips and pressed a brief kiss against the center of my knuckles. I'm in love with him. The thought arrived in those exact words, for the first time in 23 years of being alive. I didn't say it out loud, but I felt my body register it. Something shifted deep in my chest and didn't settle back where it had been. The rest of the afternoon drifted by quietly. I helped Sloane fold napkins, reorganized the pantry, brought clothes in from the line in the indoor laundry. Night fell early, the way November nights do. At 8:30, I was walking along the south corridor of the service wing, with a stack of clean towels draped over my arm, when I glanced out the window. The service gate stood about 100 feet from the house. It was a tall iron gate with a small guard booth beside it, where the night shift security man was always posted. At this hour, the booth should have been lit. It was dark. I stopped, pushed the curtain aside, looked again. The booth was dark, and beyond the gate, 3 silhouettes stood on the sidewalk. 3 men dressed in black, motionless, shoulder to shoulder. One of them held something in his hand that glinted when the streetlight caught it. I dropped the towels. I didn't run for the front door. I ran for the interior staircase, the service stairs, the only route that climbed straight to the West Wing corridor without passing through the main hall, 2 steps at a time. The silk shirt I was still wearing under my uniform slapped against my thigh. My breath came in jagged pieces. At the top, the West Wing corridor was lit. Damon's office at the far end, door shut. I knocked twice, gasping. "Come in," his voice. I pushed the door open. He was on his feet beside the desk, Kirill across from him, a map spread between them. Both heads came up at once. "The booth," I said. "The service gate booth is dark. 3 men on the street outside. One of them is armed." Damon took exactly 1 second to process it. I watched that second pass. "Kirill," his voice shifted. The Pakan's voice. "Primary exit. Cars are in the south garage. Out the front. Cancel. Morozov knows about the cars. If he's at the back booth, he's already at the front." Kirill snatched the radio and began issuing orders in Russian. Short, sharp, no room for questions. Damon turned to me. "Alina, get to the kitchen. Now." "I'm not going to the kitchen. Alina, there's a way out through the kitchen side door. It follows the service corridor, comes out at the vegetable garden in the back, and cuts along the east wall. None of your men use it because it's the staff path. The Morozovs won't know about it. I do. I walk it every day." He looked at me for half a second. Just half. Kirill, across the desk, lowered the radio. "Pakan, she's right." Damon exhaled through his nose, opened the desk drawer and took out the gun, checked the magazine, slid it into his waistband. "Lead the way." I went first. Down the interior staircase, through the kitchen. Sloane was standing in the middle of the room, eyes wide, a bread knife clutched in her fist. Kirill pointed at the pantry. "Inside. Lock it from in there. Don't open for anyone who isn't me." Sloane didn't argue. The door slammed shut behind her. We moved through the service corridor in single file. Me, Damon, Kirill. His footsteps behind me were close and controlled. The first gunshot came from the main hall, muffled by distance but unmistakable. Then a second. Then a burst. The front door had been breached. "Keep moving," Damon said behind me. Low. We emerged into the back vegetable garden. Cold air struck my face. 2 shadows were advancing along the east wall. Damon's men. Kirill recognized them, signaled, and they ran toward us. That was when the second group appeared from the side. 3 men stepping out of the greenhouse, weapons up. One of them opened fire before he'd even identified us clearly. Damon threw me behind him, shoved me flat against the brick wall of the garden. The first round hit the wall 6 inches from my head. A chip of brick broke free, sliced my elbow, and a thin line of blood ran hot down my forearm. Damon fired. Kirill fired. The 2 guards fired. 3 bodies dropped. Silence. Breathing. More shots echoed from the hall, more distant now. Damon's men were returning fire inside. He turned to me instantly, gripped my shoulder with his left hand. His eyes swept over me, open, unguarded. searching for something worse than a scraped elbow. You're hurt. It's a chip of brick. Where else? Nowhere else. Alina, nowhere else. I swear. He closed his eyes for a moment. His grip on my shoulder tightened, then forced itself to release. When his eyes opened, his face belonged to a man who had just come too close to something he would never have been able to undo. Kirill spoke a few clipped words into the radio. Confirmation came back from the men inside the hall. The last intruder had gone down. Arkady Morozov had escaped through the front gate. 2 cars, heading for the main road, tires screaming. He'd gotten away, but he'd shown his face. Damon took my face in both hands. The gauze on his shoulder was stained again, fresh blood seeping through the old dressing. He didn't seem to notice. He pressed his forehead against mine. I'm alive, I said quietly, because I didn't know how to say anything else. He didn't speak. He just breathed. Chapter 6. After the blood, the choice. The body count was taken in the main hall at 3 a.m. The air still tasted of gunpowder. The chandelier's hard yellow light fell across the Persian rug, which for the first time in 2 years, I saw stained. 2 armchairs lay overturned. A porcelain vase had shattered beside the staircase, its white fragments threaded with blue veins scattered across the marble. Kirill moved through the room, counting in a low voice. Russian, clipboard in hand. Grigory Rostov had come downstairs, the consigliere in a robe over his pajamas, his gray hair still neatly combed from before he'd gone to bed. He carried no weapon. He didn't need one. His presence at that hour was enough to signal to every man in the room that the house was still standing. Damon stood by the round table in the hall, white shirt stained at the right shoulder where the dressing had torn open. He had the phone pressed to his ear, speaking Russian to someone whose replies were louder than his questions. I sat on the second step of the staircase, a clean towel held to the cut on my elbow. Sloane was beside me. She'd emerged from the pantry and brought the towel herself. No questions, no commentary, just her hand steady on my back, while I tried not to look at the shapes Damon's men were draping with sheets near the entryway. Damon hung up. He crossed the length of the hall. When he reached the foot of the staircase, he didn't say my name, didn't excuse himself to Sloane. He simply held out his hand. I understood what it was. I took it. He pulled me to my feet. And there, in front of Kirill, Grigory, the 6 men still on duty, the 2 maids who had crept downstairs to survey the damage, he drew me against his chest. His left hand spread open across my back. His head came down. His mouth stopped at the side of my forehead. Not quite a kiss, just resting there. I felt his chest rise, fall, once, again. The third breath went deeper. Over his shoulder I saw Kirill glance at Grigory. Grigory looked at a speck of lint on his own robe, brushed at it with one finger, and turned his attention to the door molding as though he'd suddenly found it fascinating. Neither of them said a word. No one in the entire house said a word. The Pakhan of the Volkov Bratva, holding the maid in front of everyone, at 3 a.m, in a hall that had just been a battlefield, and not a single man who worked for him had any doubt about what it meant. Zoya came down at 8. I was in the kitchen with Sloane. I hadn't slept. My elbow had been sutured by Kirill at the kitchen table. 4 quick stitches from the same man who, 2 years earlier, had sat still while I practiced my first suture on his own face. Sloane had brewed coffee. I'd had 1 cup, then another, and I'd pretended the light blue shirt I wore beneath my uniform didn't belong to the man who'd slept beside me the night before. Zoya descended with the leather bag in her hand. She was wearing the red coat again, and a pair of sunglasses that hid half her face. Beneath them, her makeup was smudged under one eye. Damon waited for her in the hall. Suit on, clean, fresh white shirt, shoulder freshly wrapped. Sloane and I watched from the kitchen doorway. "Your car is out front," he said. He didn't raise his voice. "I've paid for 3 nights at the peninsula. After that, your flight to Moscow is booked. First class." Damon: "No, I only wanted..." "Zoya, I don't care what you wanted. I know what you did. You gave the service gate code to the man who came into my house last night. You thought I wouldn't find out. I found out in 40 minutes. If you're smart, you'll get in that car, take that flight, and spend the rest of your life in Moscow pretending I don't exist. If you're not, you'll try to stay. And in that case, I can't promise what my men will do with a traitor under this roof. You have 30 seconds. She said nothing, adjusted the strap on her bag, walked past him without looking in my direction. The front door slammed. Damon didn't turn to watch her go. His eyes found mine across the hall. Sloane let out a soft whistle beside me and retreated into the kitchen. "Princess, I'm only going to say this once," she called over her shoulder. "That man is terrifying. Hold on to him. Lock the door. Swallow the key. Go." Damon's private office sat one floor above the main one, a smaller room, no filing cabinets, no conference table, just a dark wood desk, 2 leather armchairs, and a wide window overlooking the back of the property. He summoned me up there after Zoya left. I took the main staircase, because that was the staircase I was going to use from now on. The door was open. He sat behind the desk in his suit, no jacket, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked up when I entered and gestured toward the armchair across from him. I sat. He stood, came around the desk, leaned against its edge, crossed his arms. "I almost lost you last night," he said. "I know. I haven't slept since 5. I can tell. Alina, I've spent my entire life believing that loving someone meant making decisions for them, because I've already lost people I loved, my father, my brother, and I learned that if I don't decide, someone else decides instead, and the person vanishes." I didn't interrupt. "So I decided. And I was going to decide for you too. I was going to send you away this afternoon, buy you a ticket, set you up with a job somewhere the name Volkov couldn't reach. Damon, let me finish. Okay. But last night you decided first. You took my hand and led me out of that trap. And if you hadn't, I'd be dead right now. And I understood something that 28 years inside the Bratva never taught me. That sometimes, loving someone means trusting them to choose their own risk." His chest rose and fell. He looked at the rug, looked back up. "I love you, Alina. Just like that. No padding around it. No softening. No, I think. No, maybe." A 34-year-old man, the head of the Volkov Bratva, pushing out a word he'd probably spoken to very few people in his lifetime, as though it had been pressing against the inside of his ribs, and he couldn't hold it any longer. I was quiet for a moment. "I've spent my whole life being afraid of choices," I said. "I didn't choose anything. I let things happen to me. Work, a roof, who I was. I survived, but I didn't live. Last night was the first time I did something because I chose to, Damon. The very first time. And it still terrifies me. I woke up this morning afraid you were going to send me away. I woke up afraid, and I came down the main staircase anyway. Why? Because I'd rather be afraid while choosing than afraid while running." He closed his eyes for a second. "I love you too," I said. He opened them. The words settled on the floor of the office and stayed there, solid, heavy, like something that had earned its ground. He moved closer, put his hand on my face, held it, leaned down and kissed me. This time it was brief, it was calm. The morning version of the kiss that had happened at dawn. The kiss of a man who had already said everything that needed saying, and was now only confirming, with his mouth, what the words had already confirmed. When he pulled back, his hand was still on my face. He pressed his forehead to mine. "Are you still going to work in this house?" he asked. "I don't know how to do anything else. You never have to work another day." "I know, but I like working. I like the kitchen. I like Sloane. I like cleaning the music room on Wednesdays. I just don't want to sleep in the ground floor bedroom anymore." He smiled, his second smile in 2 days. I was beginning to collect them. "That one, love, we can fix." The rest of the day unfolded quietly. The house breathed differently, as though it had understood, before I had, that something inside its walls had changed for good. I still served coffee, still made beds, but nobody referred to me as the maid, not once. It was already dark when I stepped out onto the balcony of his bedroom. The bedroom, capital B. My ground floor room had been emptied by Kirill at lunchtime. Both suitcases, my books, the framed photograph of Callum at his first communion, the gray coat Mrs. Petrova had given me during my first winter. Everything had been carried up the main staircase by 2 men and placed in the closet beside his. I was in one of his shirts again, dark blue this time, freshly laundered, still smelling of clean cotton, bare feet on the balcony's wooden floor, arms folded against the iron railing. The balcony was small, 2nd floor, facing the rear of the property. From there I could see the long stretch of garden, the tall wall at the far edge of the lot, and the beginning of the oak woods that separated the mansion from the road. The night was cold, the sky above Lake Forest was clear, and the air carried that November scent that city people never notice, because in the city, November smells like damp pavement, not fallen leaves. I heard the balcony door open behind me. He came out, barefoot as well, white shirt unbuttoned, a blanket in his hands, gray wool, the same one I'd folded and stored in the hallway closet a week earlier, not knowing it was being kept for this night. He settled it over my shoulders. Then he stepped behind me. His arms slid beneath mine. His forehead came to rest against the side of my hair. His whole body pressed along my back. Warm, heavy, safe. Neither of us spoke for a long time. I traced my fingers over his, laced at my waist over the fabric of the shirt. I grew up in a fourth-floor walk-up on the south side of Chicago, slept on the living room couch because Callum needed the bedroom, bathed my mother's body at 17, arrived at this house at 21 with 2 suitcases, and the certainty that I'd leave the first day someone looked at me wrong. In 23 years of living, I had never had a place. I'd had a bed, I'd had an address, I'd had a key, but I had never had a place. Standing on that balcony, with his arms around my waist, his chest against my back, his scent woven into the fabric against my skin, I thought, for the first time, that this house was a home, and that I, for the first time, had a place inside it. He kissed the top of my head, without a word. He didn't need one. I tightened my fingers around his, and we stayed like that, until the next morning arrived like a bomb. Lena here. That wraps up Book 1, and I've already finished Book 2. You can get access to it for a really small fee.
I've killed men for a lot less. Over a swapped photo. Over a name misspelled on a list. Over a 3-second hesitation before following an order. But none of that prepared me for the envelope that just landed on my desk. Inside it were 3 things. A photo of her mother, a letter signed by her brother. It's been 7 minutes and I still can't move. Then I hear her footsteps coming up the stairs. The same woman who taught me to lower my guard is about to find out what happens when the most dangerous man in Chicago feels betrayed by the only person he's ever loved, and a debt record that explained why that woman walked into my house 2 years ago pretending to be just the maid. She sleeps in my bed, wears my shirts, whispers that she loves me when she thinks I'm still asleep. And even so, she was planted here to destroy me.
Like I said, that was just a taste of Book 2. To watch it uncensored, just click on the first link here in the pinned comment. I'll see you on the other side in a few seconds. Remember, just click on the first link down here in the comments, and Book 2 complete, no ads, no interruptions, will already be available for you. It's very simple. Book 2 is something I'm loving making. You're loving it too, so I promise there will be more. It's where you find increasingly spicy stories, a true dark romance. And precisely because this version is getting more and more heated, the video isn't well accepted publicly on YouTube. This closed environment is where I can actually share my essence and where I feel free to do my best work for you. More news coming soon. I'll be waiting for you on the other side.